Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I'm Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a freelance journalist, a former associate editor of the Atlanta Jewish Times, and the author of the historical fiction novel Hands of Gold, One Man's Quest to Find the Silver Lining in Misfortune. Her name is Roni Robbins, and my interview with Roni will follow the teleportation sound. Roni Robbins, did I pronounce your name correctly?
You did. Good for you. That's a tough one, especially the first name.
Welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
I am a career journalist. I've been a journalist for 36 years. I've written for daily and weekly and national, international publications. I am currently a freelance reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and Medscape WebMD, where I was an editor up until about 6 months ago. Well, no, that's not true. October. So it's been a few months. And I found my way back to freelancing for them. I write healthcare news. For the AJC, I write about different issues in the news of healthcare and themes, I guess, or developments in healthcare in different different health concerns that people have, cancer and there are so many others that I could list, Parkinson's, and just from menopause to weight loss drugs. Also for Medscape, I cover medical students and residents because I used to cover that before. Now, I also have a second career as a writer, an author, and I wrote a book that took me some 20, probably more than 20 years to get a professional publisher because I was holding out for that as a writer. And that is Hands of Gold. So it's loosely based on my grandfather's life. And it got published in 2022. And so my side career is as a marketer of my book.
Without spoiling too much of your book, Hands of Gold, One Man's Quest to Find the Silver Lining in Misfortune, what is it about? And is it a fiction novel or a narrative nonfiction book?
So it is classified as historical fiction, but some may argue it's historical biography. It is loosely based on my grandfather's adventures and near-death experiences, both in Europe and America, what it's like to be an American immigrant in the early 1900s. I don't want to give too much away, but there are some highlights. And those are that he had tuberculosis, and that is still a disease in the news today. And it's probably the worst disease in the longest running disease in still today. And he was told he was terminal at 27, but he lived till 87. And he saved people in a workplace shooting spree. He accidentally killed somebody. And he just provided, regardless of that, regardless of any obstacles that got in his way, including financial and health, he provided a life for his family, the American dream, which didn't mean that he had to make a lot of money. It just meant that his family had to live a better life than they would have in Europe, which his whole family died practically in the Holocaust. So he came here. What's that like for people to hear about their whole family dying in a different country and knowing you couldn't do anything about it? So those are some of the highlights, and I hope I didn't give it away too much. There's also a love story and a family story. So it's a lot packed into 200 and something pages.
Why did you decide to write Hands of Gold?
So my grandfather my aunt asked my grandfather to leave cassette tapes. Cassette tapes used to be that people would listen to cassette tapes way before CDs and videos, digital, everything online and podcasts. We had cassette tapes. I think records came first, but then cassette tapes. And so he left cassette tapes. My aunt said that he should leave something for the children to hear his story. And so while he was waiting for his wife they were both in a old age home. And well, that wouldn't be the proper way to say it, especially as a healthcare reporter. They were in assisted living / nursing home, and he recorded his life story. Now, my mom passed that to me, and I listened to the cassette tapes. After he died, the cassette tapes were given to some of the family members. My mom passed it to me. I listened to it. I'm a journalist, as I said. I just was going to write a column about it, and I did. I wrote a column about leaving your life legacy in for your children, and it was my grandfather left a piece of himself behind, a legacy to his progeny, and encouraging other people to do the same, which I still do. And I had listened to all the cassette tapes, and that was what I wrote, was this little column. And then I started thinking, you know what? I'm going to transcribe all of the cassette tapes. I might be able to, there might be a novel out of this. There might be I was going to be, straightforward, biography. But I decided that it was worth something. There were enough little pieces, starting with the love story, that I thought could make something bigger than just the stories that I write for the articles that I write for newspapers, which tend to be, tops 2,000 words. And this one was going to be 80,000 words or something. I just wanted to see if there was something there, and I started pursuing and never ended, never stopped. So there you go.
How long did it take you to write your book?
So I was trying to do the math here. It probably took me years, because it took me 7 years just to win an award. I won a breakthrough Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award Contest award as a quarterfinalist in 2009. And so I was trying to think, when I finished it, enough that it was in good shape to enter an award and win an award. I was raising my children at that time, and I was also freelancing for publications. So, and I probably should throw out there my stories were in Huffington Post, Forbes, New York Daily News, WebMD, where I ended up working years later. Those Adweek, a bunch of other publications, and those were probably the bigger ones. And so I was raising my kids, writing for publications, and writing this book at the same time. So there was a lot going on. I stayed at home and raised my kids while I was doing this. So that was what I decided to do, that I couldn't do it all. I couldn't be a journalist, a full-time journalist, and have kids unless they wanted to grow up in the daycare, which I decided at some point wasn't the best education for them, that I could do a little better. Not a teacher, but at least I felt like I was smarter than the daycare workers. Not a knock on daycare workers, maybe just my daycare workers, but I just wanted them to have, I wanted them to have what I thought minimal I could give them as an educated person to raise them, and I think I did a good job. But I forgot what I just did it all. So 7 years. I'm going to estimate 7 years, and then 2 years to I should say, I entered the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award contest first time in 2007, but I won 2 years later, I won the award. So I kept trying. I kept revising and revising, and finally I won an award to the point where I said, you know what, maybe I do. Maybe this is worth something. So I needed that pat on the back to know that I was any good at this, because yes, I'm a published writer, but it's different being a published journalist and being a author. I didn't know what I was doing as being an author. So yeah, it was a definite leap of faith. Way more than you asked me, I'm afraid.
The next two questions I have are related to your background in journalism as it pertains to your work as an author. What is the most challenging aspect of writing a book coming from a background in journalism?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there are some similarities and there are some definite differences. See, if I was writing a nonfiction book, it would be easier because I wouldn't have to make up dialogue. So that's the main difference, is that when I interview people, I write what they say. Now, when I did transcribe the cassette tapes, so that was my grandfather in his voice. But then I made up dialogue. I have no idea what they talked about, and I decided that I was going to make it fiction so that I can change all the names and make up all kinds of things about them, sort of made it more dramatic than it was. And then it blurs the lines between what really happened and what what didn't happen, to the point where I'm not even sure what the real, I'd have to go back to the cassette tapes and figure out if I made this part up. But I played with a lot of the facts. And as a journalist, you don't play with the facts. You report the facts straight on. Those are the facts. You don't, I mean, unless you're opinion writer, but I wasn't necessarily opinion writer, only sometimes I wrote reviews of books or of movies, films, but concerts, what have you. But otherwise I stuck to the facts. So it was definitely a challenge to make up dialogue. And it was longer than I've ever written. I've written longer stories. I have more investigative pieces. But this was definitely much different than anything I had ever done in journalism. But again, it's based on facts. And I'm starting to write my next book, and it's hard. It's hard to make up interviews. It's hard to make up dialogue. So yeah, I have to navigate both worlds, and it's not an easy thing to make this switch. I think it is helpful that I know how to write well enough that I can get published in either of the arenas, but it's not a given, because you're a journalist, that you are going to be able to pull off this long form writing that is a book.
You kind of answered this question in your response to my previous question, but are the rules of journalism different than those of writing books?
They are. That actually is a different question. So thank you. Yes. So we have different grammar rules, and we follow the AP, or Associated Press style book, for journalism, or I have. And then publications might have their own style, and you conform to those styles. But it is drastically different. Let's just give an example. What I found interesting is that words that we use numbers for, like ages in journalism, would be spelled out. So if somebody was 101, it would be HUNDRED hyphen ONE, right? But we wouldn't do that in journalism. We would just use the numeral. So there were things like that. That was probably the main thing. I see. So there are other rules for how to write. I mean, you've got to take a. It's not who, what, when, where, and why per se. And if it is that, which is the standard of journalism, it's definitely you gotta get all that in there, but it's maybe not all, in the first, couple of pages. So, those are some examples that I found. I thought the most shocking was about spelling out all the numbers. And flow is the same. You've got to keep your reader reading. And you just really have to be much more dramatic than you would ever be in your writing. You can be looser with your writing in writing a novel in pub and literature. You can be looser. I was trained for a daily newspaper reporting style, which is keep it simple and write to a fifth grade education, maybe third grade education. But definitely for a daily newspaper, you have to keep things very simple. I'm not so sure you have to keep things as simple. You can use big flowery words in book writing. But I have to tell you, I am the kind of novelist, if I'm going to be considered in as a novelist among novelists, I don't want people to have to use a dictionary to look up any of my words. I do disperse Yiddish in my novel, and most people will get through it with limited knowledge of Yiddish, and there is a glossary in the back, but most people don't know it's there. And so I try to give context to everything, knowing that many of my readers will not be Jewish, will not have grown up with Yiddish to know the basic ones, but so much of Yiddish has gotten into the regular lexicon that people know these words. They know schlep, they know schmear. These are words that have gone into pop culture to the point where you don't need to look it up. But I want the book to be able to be read by anyone, to be easily devoured and not have to sit there with a dictionary trying to look up the words, as I have done as a reader for many novels, which are excellent, which are wonderful. But I'd rather make it easier on my reader. And so I am, in fact, trying to gear my book to the lowest common denominator, yes, but I am also know that the subject matter is universal and it can be relatable to anyone. And those at a higher level, guess what? You'll know all the words too.
Chutzpah is another word that is that has been used in the English language and is a loan word from Yiddish.
Chutzpah. Yeah, chutzpah. You have to practice it for a while. Yes, it's good that I knew what you were talking about. Chutzpah, yes, and chutzpah is my grandfather definitely in my novel it had chutzpah, or the main character, I should say, had chutzpah. Sometimes I have chutzpah. I just had chutzpah correcting you, I think, since you were on the guest. How dare me, right? But yes, there are lots of fun words from Yiddish that people use, and I'm not even sure they understand, or they just, I think Laverne and Shirley way back, used Shamil Shlamazel, and I'm not sure how many people knew what that meant back then. But yeah, most everyone uses, many people will know the words, and those are the words that I chose to use. And if I didn't, I explained it because I really don't want people to have to sit there and be stopped that's the worst thing you want to do is have somebody go, okay, I don't understand what they're saying. Now I got to look things up. I really don't want them to have to do that. So I do make it in context so that the reader will keep reading. And yes, I think there's a few chutzpahs in my novel.
Is Hands of Gold? Now, you said you held out for a professional publisher. Is your book independently published, traditionally published, or published by a hybrid press?
So you would have to ask my publisher, Amsterdam publisher, if they consider themselves a hybrid. Um, they are a professional publishing, company. They are the largest publisher of Holocaust memoirs. I was in a new area specialty of Holocaust fiction for them. But she had the owner has 100, probably more than 100 titles. So the question is, what makes a hybrid? And I would say that any publisher today requires the authors to do their own marketing. They might help you, and this publisher has been wonderful as far as helping you along, showing you the ropes, sharing, pages and pages or, long descriptions of what kind of methods you might take to market yourself. I have a little bit of an advantage in that I'm already familiar with the press, so I know how to get myself in some press media. I know what a press release, what effective press release is and what isn't, what might get their attention, when to get their attention. But no, your question was, and I've strayed off track, is are they a traditional publisher? Well, they're not one of the bigger names, no, but they are not, it is not self-published. That was what I was trying to avoid because let's face it, I've got a huge ego and I felt like that and maybe that it's a logical conclusion that somebody who does writing for a living would be able to be published in the same way I'm published by large, international global media. Why shouldn't I be able to get published as an author? So I held out. Yes, I could have definitely self-published anytime I wanted to. And, that's fine. That's fine. You get to keep all the profits when you self-publish. I was doing it to know that I could accomplish something. It was a challenge. It was a goal. It was an achievement. And I didn't want to settle until I got there. So self-publishing was not going, unless I was much older. I think at a certain point, maybe, but I just kept trying. I've got amazing determination and persistence and do things that other people don't do, I would say. Maybe that's boasting, maybe it is. But I just wasn't going to give up. And until I was, maybe health challenges or got older, and it still didn't happen. But I remained determined and I got what I wanted after all those years.
I have two more questions left in this interview. You mentioned a little bit earlier in the interview that you're working on another book. Without spoiling too much of it, could you give us a little bit of a preview of that?
Okay, so my dad passed away in March, and he was a blacksmith. And which you don't usually hear, especially a Jewish blacksmith, and he made things out of metal the same way as I make things out of words. I should say steel. So he used steel and I use my pen and paper and words and technology. But he was written up all over the country, worldwide, for his artistry, and he was my dad. So he started in our garage in New York and made a major business out of it now in North Carolina that my brother runs, Blacksmith Depot. So I'll give him a little plug. So I feel like that my dad is an interesting character in the same way as my grandfather was an interesting character. And he and my mom and me, well, very little, just a quick reference to children. We are all in my hands of gold. Very briefly, but my mom is a character in the novel, and my dad, maybe a couple of pages about their relationship and with my grandfather and the rest of the family. So I would tell you that I'm sort of taking off on the first book in that small little way and bringing out a character from the book. At the end of the book, towards the end of Hands of Gold, this is. So that's what I'm going to write about is like a character based on the character that was my dad in his memory. And now we'll see how that goes. I really just have gotten it started, the beginning, the ending, because I think those are the most powerful parts, and a little bit further, but I haven't had a lot of time because of my freelancing took off about the same time as my dad passed.
My last question is going to be out in left field, to use a baseball analogy, because my final question is, as a journalist, among the many things you've done was interview the late Hank Aaron before he passed away. And what was it like to interview Hank Aaron?
So I barely remember this, but I've interviewed a number of celebrities too. Usher and was one of them, more recent than Hank Aaron. It is always exciting to interview somebody. Wolf Blitzer is another one. I have to remember my list. But it's always exciting to interview somebody who is famous. Um, you get a little starstruck. Certainly he was an amazing human being. And he was lecturing. He was the guest speaker at an event. I can't even recall, but as I remember, very vaguely, down to earth. And now, it's interesting because we go to the Braves games here in Atlanta. Woohoo, Braves, woohoo. And there's a whole display about all the greats in baseball, and he was one of them. So I will say that interviewing celebrities is a little bit nerve-wracking, but in the end, they're just normal people, or I should say, they interview the same as everyone else. So I just interviewed today, in fact, somebody who is a doctor to the stars, so I just got to be able to do my work and get the quotes from them. I think the Usher story was more interesting because it was at in a crime scene. It was at a courtroom, and I was the only one, talking to him. And I didn't expect to talk to him, and so I quickly had to ask him a question away from all the other media. And, it was just random and it was not expected. I came out of the courtroom after staying longer and he was right there. And I asked him, it was a custody battle issue. And I asked him right away, Usher, what is your, what do you think about this? And he said, I just want what's right for my babies. And I was like caught off guard, but I had to respond very quickly. I had to jump into action. The same thing with Bobby Brown. When I was covering his daughter's tragic death, on the scene. I was caught off guard to get, to talk to him. So anyway, I just push past and treat him like everyone else in the end, in terms of getting their quotes down and knowing that they've done some amazing things and being able to touch history in that way for that brief moment, So it's exciting, definitely.
Roni, you were one of the most fascinating guests I've interviewed for the Apollo Papyrus podcast, and I thank you for appearing on this podcast.
Thank you. Wow, that's amazing. So, thank you very much for this opportunity. And can I just say, Hands of Gold on Amazon and everywhere you buy your books. So I hope that people will give it a shot and see if I'm a dynamic speaker. Then I hope that you also find me a dynamic writer in all of my avenues that I write in. But Hands of Gold. So get it in your hands today on Amazon and www.ronirobbins.com, RoniRobbins. Thank you.
Roni is one of the most awesome guests I've ever had the opportunity to interview for this podcast, and her book is available for free if you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.